Hello. Thank you so much for visiting here on my Sleepy Reading channel. Today I have another article from Good Housekeeping from May 1888, and this one is Suggestions on Wallpapering. This is part of a column called Household Economics: What Can Be Done by Handy People of Limited Means. Frequently, the householder may want to adorn the interior of his home, but is deterred because of the limited means at his or her command. The reason why so many put up with torn and dirty paper on their walls is because the expense of putting it on is so much in excess of the mere cost of the paper itself. The husband, wife, or daughter, if reasonably handy, can paper rooms without the aid of the paper hanger by the use of the subjoined hints. The success achieved in papering a small room will lead to a more pretentious venture. The selection of the paper will depend upon so many circumstances, such as the size and purpose of the room, the height of the ceiling, the color of the woodwork, the quantity of light admitted, etc., that no specific instructions can be given. It is a matter that must be decided by taste and judgment. It is generally conceded that paper in stripes seems to add to the height of a room, that dark-tinted paper should be used in a room where the light is abundant, and light-tinted paper in a room where much of the light is excluded. If you give the dealer the dimensions of the rooms, the number of the doors, windows, cupboards, etc., he will calculate the number of rolls needed and the amount of border. As he will take back any full pieces that have not been trimmed, it will be best to get more paper than you need. If you find that you have a piece or two too much, you will conclude to keep them to renew soiled portions. Should you make your visit to the dealer in person, you will generally find that you can depend upon his experience. But in any event, you should not be satisfied with a mere examination of his book of patterns. You can hardly judge by a square foot or so of paper whether it will look well on the wall. Insist upon seeing the paper in that piece, and while in a perpendicular position, for papers that look well while flat on the counter may not seem much of a pattern, or may look too pronounced when hung up. Papers with small figured designs are the best for the novice to experiment with. They are more easily matched on the wall, and slight misfits are not so noticeable. A border of course adds finish and covers not a few shortcomings. The colors in the border should be somewhat in keeping with the colors in the paper. A high-ceilinged room will admit of a broad border. A low-ceilinged room should have a narrow border. It must be trimmed, is most easily handled in short lengths, and is pasted on after the main papering is finished. Sometimes a paper will have a pattern that can be cut into narrow strips and used as a border. On one occasion we used a diamond patterned paper in this way, by cutting the pattern for a border bias way of the length. The first thing to be done is to cut off one of the white margins of the wallpaper. Which you cut off must depend whether you determine to work to the right or to the left. If you work toward your right, you must cut off the left margin and vice versa. You can measure the height of the room with a strip of the margin you have cut off. See that the end of your paper is perfectly straight, then cut off the length required from the top to the wainscot of the room. Measure subsequent lengths by the first one, being careful to match the pattern. The short lengths can be used over doors, windows, and mantelpieces. Spread the paper face downward on a long, smooth table. If the table is not long enough, let the piece hang downward at the top end. Then, with a large, clean whitewash brush, paste the wrong side of the paper, working from the lower end upward. When about half of the length has been pasted, lift up the end first done and turn it up against the remainder of the pasted part, thus making more than 3/4 of a yard double. Then proceed to paste the remainder. Lift the top end of the paper carefully by each corner, mount the stepladder, hold the pasted side close to the wall but not touching it, and then press it against the wall at the top, being careful to have it straight with the ceiling, yet not overlapping it. Take an ordinary new clean banister brush, and brush the paper right down the center, as far as the folded piece against the wall. This done, brush the sides to the wall, then unloose the folded part with the thumb and finger at each corner, and draw it gradually down. Brush the center down to the wainscot as you did the top part, then the sides, first cutting away any margin at the bottom. Some walls are so uneven that the paper may have to be partially put on and taken off a number of times. In such houses, it is best to begin at the back of a door, taking the side of the frame as a guide. The center of the paper the whole way down must hang straight, or all will go wrong. If one length is hung right, the others will follow easily enough. In hanging the succeeding ones, you should see that the patterns join exactly at the right place, and that one length evenly overlaps the other all the way down. The short pieces over the windows and doorways are easily done. Should you be obliged to make what is called a join, let it occur behind a door, or where the curtains will conceal the misfit, and make the join carry out the design of the pattern as much as possible. If you should be unfortunate enough to tear the paper in putting it on, or rub it while it is still wet, the frayed edges can be pulled out and pressed down, and if carefully done, it will not show. Or, if entirely torn out, a piece can be skillfully inlaid or overlaid. If the lengths are pasted separately, the table should be carefully wiped and dried each time, else the paper will stick and the colors blur. Experts place a number of lengths on top of each other face downward, carefully matching the sides. Then the table need not be wiped, as the layers remain inside the outline made by the sweeps of the paste brush. To paper the ceiling is a more difficult task, and the novice had better not make the attempt if calcimining will do as well. The ceiling paper is trimmed, pasted, put on, and overlapped like the paper on the wall. It must be brought down over the sides of the walls, but not so far as to be visible beneath the border after the latter has been put on. If the walls which you intend to paper have been whitewashed, they should be lightly scraped, especially if the whitewash has a scaly look. The paper will not stick well on the walls and may come off, bringing the whitewash with it. To previously size the walls with glue water put on with a large brush will prevent any such mishap. Before papering, if the walls are not too badly broken, they can be repaired with plaster Paris, something anyone ought to be able to do. The patching should be allowed to dry before the paper is put on. If the walls have several layers of paper on them, they ought to be removed by soaking and then scraping them. The paste is made by first mixing flour and cold water, beaten until the lumps disappear. Hot water is then added and the mass boiled until it is about the consistency of starch when cold. If too thin, it will make the paper more liable to tear and will dry out before you have finished handling it, and if too thick, it will not spread smoothly and quickly. So, now you know how to hang wallpaper in 1888. And since that was kind of a short article, I'll go ahead and add on the next one, which is Recreation for Leisure Hours, which is a suggestion for crafts that ladies can make at home. And this one's called Decorative Art Novelties. Very pretty hairpin receivers are made of the small Japanese globe-shaped baskets. The usual price for these is 5 cents each. Knit a mossy-looking filling in tufted knitting work. Split zephyr by winding the worsted round the finger 7 times and knitting the bunch of loops with each stitch in every alternate row. Before fastening in the filling, cut 5 long petals like those of the pond lily. Fasten these round the top of the basket so that the pointed ends will fall toward the bottom. Finish the edges of the piece with tinsel cord and put a little bell or sequin on the point. Pine cones are very decorative. They may be bronzed or gilded, and then a small picture frame screw and eye fastened in one end placed among loops of ribbon to decorate fancy baskets or wall pockets. On wood baskets they are very appropriate. There was a lovely one at the art rooms made of the woven mats that raisins are brought in. The mats are about 2 yards round. Make 2 loops of 1/3 of the distance, and of the remaining part form a circle. They must be lined with some stout material, and have a wire band round the top to keep it in shape. Make a handle of heavy hat braid, and then bronze the outside and paint an appropriate quotation in black or a different colored paint from the ground. Fasten the cones at the top of the 2 loops, or a pretty border of the small cones might be put round the top of the basket. Manicure cases may be made at home much more cheaply than the regulation ones found in stores. A piece of plush or satin 7 by 12 inches makes a pretty size. Quilt a silk or satin lining the same size. Make a full pocket across one end for the chamois, emery paper, and small pad. Stitch a strap made of satin-covered canvas at intervals for the other implements. When these are finished, place all the right side of the lining and outside together and sew all around, leaving room enough to turn it on the right side and blind stitch the opening. Sew a ribbon to the center of one end to tie the case with after it is finished. Very pretty wall cushions are made in the shape of a four-leafed clover. Pretty bonbon baskets are made by taking little fancy-shaped wicker baskets. Those shaped like hampers are the prettiest. Some have covers, others do not. They should be gilded both inside and outside, and when dry, trim with gay satin ribbons. When filled with candy, are quite pretty for gifts. Sachets in egg shape are pretty. Cut 2 pieces of thin cardboard in the shape of a large egg. Cover one side of each with satin. Place several layers of scented cotton between and sew together very neatly. Paint some pretty designs on one side. A handsome cloth for the center of the dining table is of twilled linen, 18 inches square. Around the sides are traced large maple leaves, 1 leaf at each corner underlapping those on each side of it. These are outlined with different shades of heavy gold or copper-colored floss. The veins are worked in stem stitch, and the space in the leaves are filled with different lace stitches. Cut the outer edge of the cloth close to the embroidery. Small napkins have a drawn work border, and the centers are thickly sprinkled with daisies, overlapping each other somewhat. The daisies are outlined in stem stitch with gold-colored silk, and the center loosely filled with French knots. For a very lovely handkerchief case, take a piece of lamb's wool 12 inches wide and 9 inches long, spread thickly with sachet powder. Over this place a very thin sheet of lamb's wool, then the silk intended for the lining. Quilt this very carefully by hand. When finished, the outside is sewed to this, putting the 2 silks together and sewing all round excepting one end. Turn right side out and finish this end neatly. Turn the 2 ends until they meet in the center. Neatly overhand the upper and lower edges of the pocket pieces to the back. Tie together with broad ribbon. So there you go. You can hang wallpaper and make some little crafty decorations for your room. I am amazed that anybody managed to make anything based on these written instructions back in the day. I certainly couldn't do anything without photographs, lots of them. And these days I rely a lot on YouTube to see how to make things. So I'm very impressed with anybody who actually managed to make any of these crafts from these written directions. So that's it for this reading, and I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you like it, because I've got several issues of this old Good Housekeeping that I can go through and find other articles in. I'll be back soon with some more Sleepytime reading. Take care.